After the second order to get out. While all police officers left the building, 121 firefighters never made it out.
The union also attacked Giuliani on his decision to put his communications center right there at the World Trade Center, even after it had been bombed in 1993 by al-Qaeda, and his decision to pull firefighters off search and rescue after $200 million in gold was recovered from the site. We'll get to all those points. We asked, by the way, for Rudy Giuliani or someone he would name to appear here on Hardball tonight to discuss these charges, but they declined an invitation. By the way, it's always open. Here with us now, and more on the video, which can be seen on www.rudy-urbanlegend.com, is Harold Shapeberger, who's president of the International Association of Firefighters. Who's paying for this video?
We are.
The union or the PAC?
No, our PAC. We're not using a penny of dues money to pay for this video. We're using the PAC, which are voluntary contributions from our members to pay.
Why are you going after a Republican candidate before we even have a Republican nomination?
It's not about a Republican candidate. It's about a candidate that is trying to build his candidacy on this legend of his leadership on 9/11. He's trying to embrace our industry, our profession, firefighters.
How do you back up that accusation? Does Rudy exploit firefighters?
Because he's out and around the country, and people on his behalf with the campaign are out around the country trying to sign up our members to become part of the campaign so that he can use them as a backdrop, so he can use them in their photo ops, and so that he can add to this myth that he is a hero of 9/11.
Okay, strong charges here. Are you maintaining as international president, Mr. Shapeberger, that Rudy Giuliani is personally responsible for the death of firefighters at 9/11?
I'm personally holding him responsible for the lack of radios, where 121 firefighters in the North Tower could not hear the commands to evacuate, and because of that, 121 FDNY members died that day in the North Tower. Not a single law enforcement officer that was in the tower was lost because they had radios that did work.
What is the problem with radios, and did your union complain about them before 9/11?
The radios were being complained about since the 1993 bombing. In fact,
what do they require? Line of sight or open windows? What do they require to work?
This is about going to a UHF frequency from the old frequencies. It's about firefighters being able to talk to firefighters. Last time we spoke, Chris, you talked about interoperability. It doesn't work because they did not have the frequency range to be able to penetrate inside of buildings. And the radios that they were given to replace the old radios were never field tested, and in fact were put out in the field and had to be drawn back, put in a warehouse, and on 9/11 those firefighters were using the same radios they were using in 1993.
Okay, let's talk about the second issue. That's radios, and I've heard this before, but you've done it very well. What about this other issue of the remains? How many firefighters' bodies do you believe are still somewhere in the garbage dumps, as your ads put it?
Well, this is very difficult for our members. You know, we are very much like the military. We never leave our own on the battlefield. And plus, our concern was not to leave any of those lost on that day in that
Well, how many do you think are left behind, roughly? How many guys haven't been accounted for?
Well, certainly that there are scores of our members that still have not been accounted for. But the point is...
You mean if you were to dig through the dumps, to be very blunt about this, for people watching, I'm sorry, but this is a political charge you got to deal with. You're saying if you went through the dumps, you'd find skeletons of people?
Unfortunately, there are remains that would be found in the dumps, and unfortunately, there are remains that are still part of that site, and they were we continued to find them and discover them up until a few months ago. The fact of the matter is,
to screen for those people.
The fact of the matter is,
would it have been doable?
The point is, though, I've got to make this point. The point is that when Rudy Giuliani decided to go from recovery to full excavation, it was within 24 hours after they recovered the $230 million of gold and silver bars in the Bank of Nova Scotia's vault. It was within 24 hours, eight weeks into that incident, that he decided that the incident was too dangerous for firefighters. That was what we protested
What do you
again.
mean? I don't get this. What's the connection between finding $200 million in gold and stopping the search for bodies?
Because in my opinion, it was more important for him to find the gold than it was to continue to find and recover remains. No, he found the gold on October 31st. And on November 1st is when he issued the order to remove the firefighters from their recovery mode.
Well, explain that, because I can't figure that connection out. What is the connection?
Well, the connection is that he was in full recovery mode as they continued to sift and look for those assets, in addition to the dignified recovery that our members were looking for.
Because there's so much money out there, gold out there, they didn't want to take the time to go through the remains carefully anymore. They wanted to go look and make sure they got all the gold.
When they retrieved the assets, I can tell you what the facts are. The facts are that on October 31st, the Brinks armored trucks loaded the gold out of that site, and the next day is when the mayor issued the order to move the firefighters off the pile and discontinue with the recovery mode and go to full excavation.
Because he thought there was more money out there somewhere? There's more gold?
No, because he wanted to get the site cleaned up on his watch, because he was getting pressure from lower Manhattan businesses.
Oh, you're saying he only kept the search going long enough to get the gold?
Well, there's no question about it. Well, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Well, that's the implication.
No, well, that's what I'm saying. I'm very clearly saying that, you know, early on in that incident, he said we'd continue with a dignified recovery of all those lost right down to the last brick. Unfortunately, it turned out to be to the last gold brick. Yeah,
well, let's take a look. Here's his response. By the Giuliani campaign responded to your video, Mr. Schaeferger, by issuing a press release saying that under Mayor Giuliani, the FDI, the Fire Department of New York, secured $10 million of bunker gear for all firefighters. They purchased thermal imaging cameras, purchased personal alarms for all firefighters, and that Mayor Giuliani increased funding for the FDNY. He updated the aging EMS ambulance fleet. He increased staffing from 4 to 5 firefighters and 60 engine companies, and added more, actually 1 new division and 2 new companies.
Listen, a mayor's job,
do all that? Is that right?
A mayor's job in every one of our cities is to make sure that firefighters have adequate equipment, bunker gear. These are not great. Okay. These are not great.
Harold, I've talked to you before. I've always understood that the one union in the United States that has a sizable, if not a half of its membership, are Republicans. Yours does. Do you believe you speak for all firefighters when you say you won't vote for Giuliani?
We got 281,000 members, Chris, and you know our union. Our union is politically diversified. It's a cross-section of this country.
Well, how can you slander one Republican
I'm not going to
candidate?
suggest that every member will agree with this. I will suggest this. Walk into any New York City firehouse and ask them about their position and their opinion of former Mayor Giuliani. I'll live with that result. Okay. The fact is we do speak for our members, and the fact is that our members are more than concerned about the treatment of those that were lost on that day and the treatment.
Well, this will surprise a lot of people, Mr. Schaeferger. Thank you very much. Harold Schaeferger. Harold, I'm from Philly. That's the hardest thing to pronounce. Harold, not Howard. Harold Schaeferger, President of the International Union of Firefighters. Up next, Senator Olympia